Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you can all hear and probably see me. I'm going to take that as a yes. I want something of a chat window here. So the chat window's open. If anyone has any comments, you can use the chat window as we go along. We're not going to hang about to start because I understand this is a busy time of the day for everybody. Because we all want to, in the UK here, we want to get off and have some lunch, and you guys are probably having some lunch or had some lunch or something. But anyway, so we're not going to hang about, and we're going to start. And today's topic will be use of the public address and voice alarm system in the retail environment, because we've done a few of these. We did a few weeks ago, we did introduction to PAVA systems in general. And then a couple of weeks back, we did one on office type high rise. And then after the office type high rise, the next one to come along is this one, which is about retail. And we'll be taking a little break after these ones, but we'll be doing some more in a month or two's time. So what we're going to do now is crack on and talk about this. So there'll be an opportunity at the end to ask some questions. So if you'd like to keep your timing for that, that would be great. Okay, let's start with rushing off too soon. Voice alarm for retail presentations. We're going to discuss voice alarm in retail premises. We're going to look at the risks, the requirements, and then we're going to talk about the technical requirements of different types of systems, different types of venues, and address the issues around what the staff might want to do, and a brief point on ensuring that the quality is good for customer engagement. So the issue of the major risks in retail is pretty straightforward. The people in a shop don't know that shop necessarily. I mean, some of them will have been there a number of times, but maybe they've always come and gone through the same entrance. Their mind is rarely on their personal safety. They're much more enthusiastic about, trying on a new pair of jeans or looking at a new telly or whatever it is that they're there to do. And then what happens is if an alarm occurs, they sort of stand around, look confused. They don't really know which way to go. And one of the novelty items you get is that quite often people might actually leave the building still carrying their large collection of, their large bag with all their stuff in that they were going to buy, but now they just walk out the shop with it. So there's an interesting selection of issues that you have when you're when you're managing a shop during a fire incident. So the voice alarm gives us the opportunity to efficiently deliver the public safety information. In different countries, voice alarm may be mandatory for your shop. In other countries, it will not be mandatory. So in Germany, for example, I know it's mandatory from a certain size. In Poland, it's mandatory from a certain size. In the UK, it is not mandatory, but we have the Institute of Sound Communications and Visual Engineers Voice Alarm Manifesto, which suggests that voice alarm should be in any retail building exceeding 3,000 square meters or more than 1,500 square meters in a multi-level building. So this typically brings in the size of supermarket you would normally expect to have a voice alarm. Again, just reminding ourselves that the point of the voice alarm is it gives clear, unambiguous instruction to the occupants as to what to do. And what we know is that, if you're standing in a shop and you're concentrating on your new jeans or your telly, and there's some random bell or sounder going off in the background, you have absolutely no clue what that's really about. So the chances are you're not going to do anything about it at all. And then in terms of how that works out, you can also use this communication system for other things. So For example, were there to be someone in the street outside who's indulging in some activity we don't like, running around with a big knife or a gun or something, you can tell people to remain in the shop rather than actually encouraging them to go outside to face the particular assailant. And also, obviously, you can use it as a communication. If you happen to have a power failure, you could, if all the lights went off in your store, you could tell people just hang where they are for 30 seconds because the power will be restored. Or you could ask them to leave in an orderly fashion, obviously relying on the fact that you have a battery backup on your voice alarm, which of course you should under EM54, EN54 regulations. So again, we're managing the evacuation. We want a system that's easy to use because the shop staff, a lot of them, aren't highly motivated by the safety of their customers. We want people there to have, to be able to appreciate what we're saying to them or what adverts we're playing to them. And, again, we're going to look at some smaller to large systems. So if you imagine how to manage the evacuation in a retail store, in a small store, it's not very challenging. You just ask everybody to leave using the message will come from your voice alarm triggered by fire detection and say, everybody, please leave now. As stores get larger, that could become potentially more of a challenge. And one of the things that we often see is that there's an investigation period between the fire alarm receiving an alarm activation and when you would actually commence the evacuation of the public. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, if it's a very, very silly break glass accident that's happened as you're wheeling some stock around, you don't really want to stop everyone shopping because stopping people shopping is very expensive because they take a long time to come back in the shop afterwards. And secondly, what tends to happen is that in that delay period, the time between the activation and the public evacuation, you can move your staff in a way that will make the evacuation safer. And let's not miss out the fact that you can avoid stock shrinkage by if you put staff near the doors, then people will put down what it was that they picked up that they were thinking of buying or thinking of just walking out with. And obviously you can get your staff into a position where they can start to usher people in the right direction. This right direction thing again is very important and something that voice alarm does very well compared to traditional fire alarm, in that the public will tend to go back to the exit point where they entered. So if they came in a tiny side door and they're actually right on the other side of the store, as soon as the situation turns into an emergency situation, they will tend to wend their way back to where they came in and exit through the point of entry. So we might want to discourage that either by making a clear message about which doors you should or shouldn't use, tell people not to use the lifts, and of course have some staff on hand potentially to usher people along. So these are all the things that you're going to think about in the evacuation planning, and you're going to use that 3-minute delay, or I say 3 minutes, it's an arbitrary figure, depends on the size of the store and your local agreement with your licensing officers, but that's a typical sort of time to arrange your staff and get the message across to the people. In the very, very largest malls, you can use a phased evacuation. I mean, the standard very much in retail is you just ask everyone to get out at once. But there may be some circumstances in a large mall where you might want to get some people moving faster than others. As well as phased evacuation, you might also have a sort of compartmentalized evacuation where, for example, you move all one set of people from one section of shops in one direction and another in another direction. So phased evacuation could mean in this sort of typical stairwell type approach here, where we're avoiding overcrowding on stairs, or it could just mean that we are partitioning the building into several different zones, and we're evacuating people in different zones in different directions. So again, you know, in a larger store, mall environment, you know, you need to, as the voice alarm provider, you need to be in negotiation with the licensing and the owners and the investors to make sure you're making for a safe evacuation. So overall, our system that we're going to put into a shop should be nice and easy to use by the security people, by the actual shop assistants, and so on. So one of the tools to have in your armory there is to have a nice useful microphone. So using this DMS microphone that we have here, we have a few options on there. First of all, it has some music inputs. You can't see them, they're around the back, but it has some music inputs, so you can put some receiver. I don't know how you're doing your music in your shop. It may be that you have a computer-based, just straight MP3 type thing, or you might use a satellite downloader to bring in managed content and feed that managed content into the system. But whichever way you're actually sourcing that music, you can feed it into the microphone, and then it will then be translated actually into digital and taken across a Cat5 type cabling to the voice alarm center. So we're obviously using the voice alarm as VAPA with music, because we're trying, you know, we're going to hopefully entertain these people while they're in our shop, so they stay longer and spend more cash. We might have multiple music sources for different themes. This can happen if you have like a boys department and a girls department, or where you have an adults department and a children's department. You might find that there are different music themes wanted for different areas. So we have 4 inputs on the DMS. So in principle, on one DMS, you could have different types of music for different areas. And then obviously you can use the pre-recorded messages, so we can use the buttons on the right hand side there to trigger pre-recorded messages around closing times, or potentially you could set up an advert to run every 15 minutes within the configuration software, and you could toggle that on and off using those buttons as well. So having a nice flexible control surface, but you know, still nice and simple. If you were to have a much larger store, you could add an extension keypad to that to give you some more options and opportunities to configure different messages, different zones or setups for different ways of running the store. Good content delivery, I guess, you know, one of the things about PAVA in general is that very often the voice alarm speakers can be pretty basic. You know, you need to marry off the budget here with what the ambition is. If you're going to use, you are going to play music through the system and you want to run advertising through that, using a music quality ceiling speakers is you know, highly advantageous. Not just buying the smallest ones, but using something decent. And you know, our systems have a little graphic equalizer in them as well, parametric equalizer, so that you can get a reasonable sound quality in the store. One of the things which I've seen in a number of locations is you basically put in voice alarm type loudspeakers throughout in the ceiling grid, but then to give it a bit of heft in music. So perhaps you've got a bar in your mall, or you're relaying some activities from a sort of mini stage area. You can add some extra low frequency. That doesn't need to be part of the EN54 life safety stuff. You can add any old sub bass that you want, and basically you're just going to leave that so that in the event, you can program it into the system, so in the event that there's an emergency, that sub bass would be disconnected, because it's not adding anything to the frequency response in the area we're interested in, which is the emergency messages. We're just putting a little bit of thump into a bass drum or something like that. One of the other things you see increasingly in stores is synchronization with screens. So you might have screens running advertising material in the open area of a mall. So one of the things you might need to do there is actually synchronize your audio delivery with those screens. Again, this is all possible. We have the ability to provide delays, again, through the controller to different zones. If you want, that's on the larger systems, not on the smallest systems, but on the larger ones. But you know, what you would typically find in a larger mall. So yeah, we can do that as well, and that can be considered in the mall type environment. So our systems in general, Ambient manufactures essentially three sort of sizes of system. The mini-VES and the midi-VES are both compact systems running essentially from a single zone up to really 16 zones. So they're compact in that they're sort of wall mountable, and they're as an off-the-shelf item. And then we have the multi or smartVES systems, which is a scalable system which you build to order to match whatever you need, really. So when we look at the smallest type of store, the mini-VES there is going to do everything that we need. So we've got our paging microphone somewhere near the desk if we're having a paging microphone at all. We've got some music inputs. We've got the potential for an input from satellite or something, and then obviously we've got a connection from the fire panel, which is going to trigger our automated message. So for the smaller retail unit, you know, we're talking up to 4 zones, 640 watts, more than adequate for a small to medium type of store. As we head up into the department store idea, again, we're still concentrating on the idea that we have this main microphone. Main microphone has got music input. We can then start to add microphones in and around the store. Again, using LAN technology, if we use the DMSs, so that the DMS microphones are going to sit on the LAN. We can use the customer LAN for that. We don't need to install dedicated cabling because it's not part of we're not going to make any fire evacuation messages via those microphones. So it's totally fine to put them on the customer LAN. And again, we've now got our fire panel. We've potentially mentioned here, we might have this coded alert idea with time to evacuate. So we're going to put out a staff call 100 or something on the first activation of fire. And then we're going to set up the timer inside the midi-VES, and that timer will allow 3 minutes to count down, potentially repeating the staff call 100 once a minute. And then at the end of our 3-minute investigation time, it's going to just ask, it's going to step up the cause and effect and start asking everybody to leave. So again, we're able to make a nice flexible bit of programming there for the larger store. Obviously, you know, some areas, public areas will be music, some areas around the back of house will be non-music. I mean, we've shown little pretend projectors, but realistically they're more likely to be metal wall speakers or horns once they're out of public view. And I don't suppose there'd be projectors in the store either, but there we go. Okay, when we get to a multi-unit mall, we have to start to think about how to deal with the shops that are in it, as well as the actual mall area. So we'll discuss that in a second on the output side. On the input side, we've now brought on board a SIP gateway. So the Ambient SIP gateway can be involved there, and that's going to give us a connection so that would enable people to dial through to the PA from private mobile radio, or also to interface from a digital SIP telephone system. So we could potentially enable more people to make announcements without having dedicated microphones. So the head of security could go through PMR, or the manager, you know, the mall manager could potentially go to a phone which was a SIP enabled phone and make announcements through the SIP gateway. So we've got our music, we've got our traditional microphones, we've got our PMR, we've got SIP insert points, probably The fire microphones maybe have doubled up at this point, because we'll may have one on the outside of the building somewhere in a weatherproof housing, and that's going to be at the place where the muster point, where the fire engine comes to. So a fire commander will come with the brigade, and that person will then take control of the evacuation. The fire microphone normally being located next to the fire detection system panel, potentially, like I say, on the external face of the building, and probably in a covered area. So that's upgraded. We've got multiple scenarios on our fire panels, so we might enable people to move. We might ask people to evacuate using different routes. And then, like I said, we've got to think about what we're doing into the shops. And the easiest way, in some ways, is basically to put some extra speakers in the shops, and then to add a relay unit into that shop. And then, as a part of the license condition for renting the shop in the mall, you would have to agree that the power to your own background music system, or part of that background music system, is essentially powered through a mains relay connected in conjunction with the voice alarm. And it's actually important to distinguish that it should be done through the voice alarm and not really through the fire alarm, because the fire alarm may not be activated if you have a non-fire emergency that you want to evacuate from. So in the event that we have our guy hanging around in the street outside with a sword, we don't want people to go outside. There's no fire. So you need to ask people to remain in the building, and you will not, if you've only got your shop BGM systems connected through a relay off the fire alarm, you will not be able to do that. So in order to maximize the usefulness of the system, we need to disconnect that BGM from relays driven from the voice alarm system, which of course we can do. The next route up, and obviously this is as we are all here, installers, manufacturers, and suppliers of voice alarm, this is our ideal scenario. The ideal scenario is that we provide like a mini VES in each of the small stores, and then we just make a big ring of the whole place. And that means we've sold a voice alarm into every store. Every store is then is able to use it to make its announcements. Every store can use it to play its own music through. But because they're all sitting on a managed network, we now know that they're all working. We can override the local inputs, make any messages that we want to make across their systems. And actually it gives us a little bit of security that the systems are all working in these shops, because we're managing that through our reporting process, and we know that the voice alarm in its entirety is still functional. A lot of the problems you come with these small stores is people have their own shop fitters in. The shop fitters see these speakers, they don't know why they're there, they disconnect them. So if we have this type of arrangement, it's very, very quick and clear to see when that might have happened. When you look at this idea of managing these things, if you are a guy or a company with 40 or 50 stores, actually having remote management is very important. So the managing your multiple retail outlets can take place from one position. We can provide you with some software to remotely assess the status of all those various systems. From there you could also, with the correct sort of connections over the cloud or whatever, you could manage your streaming service to ensure that you're getting consistent messaging across your outlets, radio, Top Shop or whatever. And finally, if there were to be an emergency in any shop, the person at the centralized location would be aware of that. And a sort of slight advance to that, we're not going to talk about this too much today, but Ambient this year is releasing a new voice alarm technology with some new generation DSP, and part of that is that we are providing more intelligent measurement of system performance in the venue. So we're recording background levels in zones before paging. We're recording the level during paging so that we understand that we're reaching the right SPL, and therefore we're able to estimate that all of our messages meet the STI requirements. And we can record the background noise level from time to time, which can be useful if you're running a set of stores and examining changing levels. Part of that is just about the fact that if you're running 50 shops, you know that the system's working in those 50 shops. It can be important to your license to know your voice alarms are all working. So it's giving you a nice asset management feature there. So at the top end of that type of that type of arrangement, you could have something that looks a bit like this, with your remote control center, VLAN going out to the actual shops, multi-channel amplifiers, microphones, the acoustic surveillance, and whatever other bits and pieces you might want to throw in for good measure. But certainly that's quite an advanced system. In terms of what we've done at Ambient, these are some shops that we have been involved with. So IKEA in various cities, a lot of Tesco's, Mabel Hofner, Mercury Market. So there we've cut our teeth with plenty of different shops, and there's we have some good experience across different shops and different retail outlets of different sizes. And with 4 minutes to go out of our 30 minutes, that brings us to the end of our presentation.